Going. The House Energy Communications and Technology Committee will come to order. Madam Clerk, would you please read the roll call?
Chair Scott,
Present.
Representatives Andrews, Coleman,
Here.
Witsit,
Here.
Neely,
Here.
Burns,
Here.
Churches,
Present.
Hill,
Here.
McDonald,
Present.
McFall,
Here.
Wenzel, Outman,
Here.
Aragona, Bagol,
Here.
Green,
Here.
Preston, Schmaltz.
Yes. Here.
Madam Chair, you have 13 members present. You have a quorum.
Very good, thank you. We need a motion to adopt the minutes from the February 8th, 2023 meeting. Rep. Outman, thank you, moves to adopt the minutes. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today. In the committee today, we're going to have Corey Conley from Climate and Energy Advisor, Michigan Department of Environment. Great Lakes and Energy. Joining Corey is Travis Busco, who is the Legislative Liaison, Office of the Affairs at EGLE. Can you please come forward?
Yeah. Good morning, Madam Chair. Thanks
Good
for having us
morning.
in this morning.
Glad
Nice
to
to
have
see
you
you.
this morning.
And committee members, thanks for having us in. My comments are going to be pretty duplicative of what the chair just said because Corey's the star of the show today. I am Travis Boskel. I'm the legislative liaison with EGLE. Good to see some of you again, and I'll be looking forward to meeting some of you and working with you. Corey runs our Office of Climate and Energy, and he's going to give the bulk of the presentation, so I'm going to turn it over to him so we can dive right in.
Thank you, Chair Scott, and thank you to the committee for having me. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on the My Healthy Climate Plan. And I'll just say before I dive in, I expect this to be the first of many conversations on this subject because it's a far-ranging topic with lots and lots of opportunity to collaborate. So I'm going to provide an overview of our office, overview of some of the ways that we develop the climate plan, then some of the specific items in the climate plan for consideration in terms of legislative action, and then sharing some upcoming activities of the Office of Climate and Energy and our work to implement the climate plan. So to kick it off, the Office of Climate and Energy, for folks that aren't familiar, was created in 2019 via executive order in the reorganization of departments that created EGLE as well. And the main focus for the office is providing policy guidance, coordinating activities toward meeting climate objectives and tackling climate change, and became the main thing that it became tasked with was developing the climate plan and now the implementation of the climate plan. Also very relevant for the work that we're doing is the Council on Climate Solutions, which was the main advising body made up of 14 Michigan residents and a number of principals from across the interagency to help guide the development of the climate plan. So I'll talk about both of these entities kind of throughout, and I'll refer to Office of Climate and Energy as OCE often, just in case I forget to spell it out, and the Council on Climate Solutions I'll likely refer to as the Council. So Michigan's climate commitments, I think this is a good place to start. The governor is committed to reducing emissions from 2005 levels by at least 26 to 28% by 2025 and 50 to 52% by 2030 as a part of joining the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is an alliance of states of, I think it's 24 states now, that have made these same commitments and are working collaboratively to reach these goals. We also set an economy-wide carbon neutrality target for no later than 2050 and to maintain net negative greenhouse gas emissions thereafter. And then as a note in terms of kind of where the climate plan comes from, OC was directed to develop, issue, and oversee implementation. EGLE was through the Office of Climate and Energy via executive directive, and it's really with the intention of meeting those major emissions reductions targets. I will note that also included in the executive directive is a requirement for us to consider and try and develop a plan that addresses equity issues and support and and brings disadvantaged communities into the solutions that we're developing. So before we dive into the actual meat of the plan, I think it's just worth reviewing quickly some of the reasons why we think that it's so urgent for us to develop, so urgent for us to take action. So I've dedicated my whole life to this, so it seems like it should go without saying. But in Michigan, as we've seen even recently with major power outages and increased storms, we're seeing the impacts of climate change today. And we're seeing that both in terms of acute things right now, like I'm from Leelanau County. If folks are familiar with Leelanau, it's the tip of the peninsula up there is where I'm from. And a few years ago, all of the cherry crops were damaged. So all of my friends were struggling to get by just because of a change in the frost-thaw cycle. And we're starting to see those types of things happen more and more across Michigan. And on the aggregate, we're seeing 3 degrees warmer, and we're getting about 5 more inches of rain, as is evidenced by flooding in southeast Michigan and a variety of other areas as well. So just kind of trying to emphasize that, one, we talk a lot about climate action as something that's going to happen in the future, but it is really happening now, and it's only going to get worse. And while Michigan is oftentimes looked at as a climate haven, so to speak, it doesn't mean we're immune to the impacts of climate change. It just means we might be more prepared to address them or cope with them. So some of the other pieces of the climate plan that are reasons why we think climate action is really important. You know, I'm going to constantly talk about climate impacts and the environmental impact on the aggregate. But it's also a major opportunity for us to make progress on other policy-related outcomes and things that will improve lives of Michiganders. So improved health outcomes is one of the major pieces of that, and we get into some detail of the co-benefits that come with this transition in the climate plan. But notably here, you can see as we've transitioned primarily away from coal-fired power generation, we've seen a related decline in criteria pollutants, so localized air pollutants, particulate matter, things that cause asthma in many populations. And that is something that I think we're really excited about. And we looked at the numbers, and I think we're anticipating it being down to, from 2005, a 96% decrease if we do successfully, by 2030, if we do successfully implement the objectives of the climate plan and reduce our dependence on coal-fired power generation. Another major opportunity that we see, and I mentioned that it was a core part of the climate plan to address environmental injustices. There are a number of things, and the way we thought about it in the climate plan is we want to make sure that as we're developing these solutions that we're trying to address where we can historical harms, trying to prevent and trying to address any current harms that communities are facing, try and prevent future harms, environmental harms from the future energy system and transportation system that we're trying to build, and then also make sure that folks have equitable access to the jobs of the future, the economic development. And so I think we have a major opportunity here to do that as we rethink a lot of our systems. One of the specific items that you can see on your screen here is thinking about energy burden in the state of Michigan. That's the proportion that somebody spends on their heating and electric bill as a proportion of their annual income. We see that in the lowest level of poverty in the state of Michigan, well, I'll say first, the statewide average is 2 to 3% energy burden, so that's pretty typical. In the lowest income brackets, it's closer to somewhere between 18 and 23%. I've seen that as the average. So if you can imagine spending a quarter of your income on your heating and electric bills a month and annually, you can imagine that it's pretty hard to make ends meet in that situation. So I think we have an opportunity to really think about that, and it's actually incumbent upon us as we start to make this transition to think about how we're making sure that folks are taken care of and that we're actually not just preventing this from getting worse, but trying to make it better as we go. And then this is the one that, it's one of the reasons why I ended up in the climate and clean energy space as a career path, but I think it's one of the more compelling features too, is that we're starting to see a major transition in the economy toward clean energy jobs, clean sector jobs, so to speak. And you can see here it's broken out into renewable energy, grid storage, clean fuels, vehicle electrification, so advanced transportation there, energy efficiency. You can see energy efficiency continues to be the largest one, but here in Michigan, obviously, we're home to advanced transportation and vehicle electrification. And so that's a major opportunity. As of 2021, we have maybe 120,000 jobs in the clean energy sector in Michigan. And I saw a recent projection that just from the investments from the IRA, there have been 10,000 new jobs in the clean energy sector since that passed, and there's a projection of another 160,000 in the next decade. So this really is a major opportunity, and not only is it going to create jobs, but it also lowers costs for folks. When we invest in energy efficiency and energy waste reduction, we see about a 4-to-1 return for homeowners in terms of cost savings. So, and we've been very good at that in the state of Michigan. So the last thing I'll say, those are some of the big motivating factors and some of the opportunities we see by taking climate action beyond just the environmental impacts. But this is an important piece of what's going on, and it's not in the climate plan because the Inflation Reduction Act wasn't out then, but it is a game changer for the work we're doing. And it actually encourages us to think about the climate plan as something that we always thought it would be, is an iterative document that needs to grow and continue to be evolved. And I think that there are two big implications of the federal dollars. One, there are three, I guess I'd say. One is there's just an incredible amount of economic development opportunity for the state in this space. And so I think it aligns more interests. But two, I think we have a great opportunity to actually go beyond what was outlined in the climate plan because the economics have changed. And even if we didn't adjust what's in the climate plan based on these federal funding opportunities, it should be easier to meet the goals in the climate plan as a result of these things. Just to lay it out real quickly, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants, that's a $5 billion program. Literally, the announcement on it is coming out today. While we speak, the guidance on it. And we are mobilizing at Eagle and at the Office of Climate and Energy to try and make sure that we get as much of that as possible to the state of Michigan. And that's exactly to implement plans like our My Healthy Climate Plan. That's the intention in that program. And then the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is a $27 billion program. It's the single biggest budget allocation in the IRA, and that is specifically for financing for and grants for renewable energy efficiency upgrades, and $7 billion of that in particular is focused on low-income access to solar through community solar and rooftop solar primarily, but there may be other ways as well. So just wanted to flag those things as like a changing context and emphasize the point about the climate plan that it is something that needs to continue to be evolved and worked on collaboratively as conditions change and the context changes. So now I'm going to go ahead and dive into the My Healthy Climate Plan and get into some of the process and then some of the content that's in it. So again, I mentioned it's something that's going to evolve, but a couple of other things that are worth noting. This is meant to be an economy-wide plan, which means that, and you'll hear me say this many times, my team is sick of hearing me say it, but we need everyone to participate in this and to be able to make this plan a reality. And that's everything. Luckily, we have great leadership from the business community, from nonprofits. We have great action taken by the governor showing her leadership. Our departments are mobilizing. And we're really excited about the opportunity to work with you all because this plan we can't accomplish it without legislative action. All right, so the development of the plan, it's worth noting how it was developed because it did take a ton of people. We had 6 topical work groups that had hundreds of people participating, contributing thousands of hours of work. We received public comments galore on our draft plan when we put it out, and then we had to figure out how to incorporate as much of that as possible. We had dedicated listening sessions throughout 2021 and 2022, and with specific tribal consultations and specific listening sessions for environmental justice communities as well, that we made sure were at times that were more accessible and that were dedicated solely to that topic. So what's in the climate plan at a high level, before I dive into some of into the sector-specific pieces, the way it's organized is there's kind of the information I just gave you, and then a bit of background on the greenhouse gas emission profile of the state of Michigan, and then we get into this, which is the meat of it, which is the plan is focused on goals reaching 2030. So how can we meet that 50 to 52% by 2030? That's our main objective with the climate plan. That's what we're trying to lay out. And we believe that that will get us on the pathway to carbon neutrality by 2050. But if we don't get on that track, we are going to it's going to be very hard for us to reach the goals laid out by 2050. So the main high level we call them kind of North Star goals in the climate plan, or commitments in each section. One is in justice. It's ensuring 40% of state funding goes to climate-related benefiting Michigan's disadvantaged communities. That's aligned with the Justice 40 initiative from the Biden administration. So we're just kind of doubling down on that and saying that state-related funding and federal funding, we're committing to that as it relates to climate. Cleaning the electric grid, we called for generating 60% renewables from 60% of our electricity from renewable energy by 2030 and phasing out coal-fired power generation by that time. It's worth noting that currently, based on integrated resource plans, there's really only one facility that would have an accelerated closure timeline as a result of that. So there's currently only one plant that's being considered for retirement after that date, and we'd be calling for the transition to actually happen by 2030. And then limiting energy burden, I've talked about it in the previous slides, but we called for a 6% limit. Obviously, that's above the state average, but it would take that 24% I talked about, 18 to 24%, and cut it down to no more than 6% for low-income Michiganders. So electrifying vehicles and transportation, major objective there, build the infrastructure necessary to support 2 million vehicles on Michigan roads by 2030, and increase to clean transportation options, including public transit, by 15% per year. Repairing and decarbonizing homes, this one's kind of the most basic, but it's also a bit eye-popping. Reduce emissions related to heating Michigan homes and businesses by 17% by 2030. If you think about the overall objectives of the climate plan, we're saying we want to reach 50 to 52% emissions reductions by 2030, and we're saying from our buildings, so this is the emissions from heating our buildings, our ambitious target is 17%. That means that we have to see emissions reductions higher than 50 to 52% in other parts of the economy. That's why we're calling for 60% renewables and aggressive adoption of electric vehicles, because it's very hard to decarbonize homes. In terms of industry and recycling, we called for encouraging innovation, tripling Michigan's recycling rate, and to 45% by 2030, and cutting food waste in half by 2030. All of those things are linked to climate, and we see kind of, as I said, this is a far-reaching issue that many of the state's activities have implications for. And then the last one is protecting Michigan's land and water, protecting 30% of Michigan's land and water by 2030. So that's the roadmap portion I'm going to focus on because of the purview of this committee, and because it's where the most of our activities that we're recommending is in the electricity sector, the transportation sector, and the built environment. And the reason that we're focused in those areas is that the electricity sector is where we think there are the most ready-made technologies, and we're able to transition the fastest. Many of the solutions in the electric vehicle and built environment are actually dependent on electrification, clean electricity to be provided. And those are the three sectors that have both the very high profiles in terms of our proportion of emissions in the state of Michigan, and have great potential to, we think, by 2030 see decarbonization. All right. So I'm going to try and get through this quickly because I realize I'm eating into my friends at Leo's time. But so that 60% renewable energy target, I mentioned that, we talked about it. I'm going to dig into some of the areas where we think there's opportunity for collaboration and challenge and with the legislature. So updating Michigan's renewable portfolio standard would be an option. Improving the integrated resource plan process. You heard from Chair Scripps a few weeks ago about the opportunity that exists there, working with the utilities hand in hand in developing plans that help meet the climate objectives of the state of Michigan, creating more favorable conditions for customer-enabled renewables. So that goes with our kind of like, it's going to take everyone. We need to build large-scale renewables. We also need to create opportunities for everybody to participate in this transition, and that's where that customer-enabled piece it comes to. It's voluntary green pricing. It's looking at ways to expand access to rooftop solar, considering community solar, kind of anything and everything should be on the table as we think about how we're going to meet our renewables targets. Setting an energy storage target. We call for a 2,500 megawatt energy storage target to help make sure that we're dealing with resource adequacy and reliability as a part of this transition in the climate plan. But I think the details of that, as we kind of should evolve as we have further debate and consideration. Limiting energy burden to no more than 6%. I've talked about that at length. I think there are lots of ways to think about this. It's a complicated topic, and I hope that it's the subject of more conversation in the future. In the built environment, we think about this in two big buckets. What do we do with new buildings? What do we do with existing buildings? New buildings is largely going to happen through the building code. I'm not going to opine on that here. That's more of like a rules process. But in terms of existing buildings, we called for a few things in the climate plan that we think are valuable. So one is increasing energy waste reduction standards. Those standards are really been successful across the state of Michigan. Our investor-owned utilities actually meet and exceed those standards regularly, kind of year over year. I have a graphic that I cut that basically just shows that they're just killing it on making sure that they meet those standards. And we think that we could increase those and increase benefits for customers as a result. Restore energy waste reduction standards for municipal electric and gas utilities. So there's a sunset in the legislation on that could very well be looked at. And then increase financing options for energy efficiency upgrades and clean energy. And there are lots of options for that. A lot of the federal funding is going to support those types of things, and a lot of and there are a number of items that could be considered. Improving our on-bill financing language in statute, a number of items that could help make some of these upgrades and the transition to them more affordable and happen faster. I don't know what happened. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. I'm sometimes technology literate. Supporting 2 million vehicles on the road, electric vehicles on the road by 2030. This is an ambitious target. We talked about it before. We're looking at, right now, we have maybe 32. Judd will know actually better than me. He'll know the exact number to the date. But the data that we have here says about 32,000 vehicles on the road, with a chunk of those being plug-in hybrid electric vehicles like the Chevy Volt with a V that I drive. But we're looking at wanting to have 2 million EVs on the road by 2030. So we've got a long way to go. We got a lot of action to take, but we think that obviously we're the auto capital of the world. We'd like to be the leaders in that, and we think we can do it. There we go. So EV charging infrastructure, similarly, we need to deploy chargers fast. You can see that we're seeing an uptick in level 2 charging. At Eagle, we do have the Charge Up Michigan program, and there's federal funding, the NEVI dollars, National Electric Vehicle, and I always forget the I, but it's for charging infrastructure. It's probably infrastructure. There we go. Nothing like a little bit of comedic relief when you're trying to really get it in under the wire here. So a few of the options that are identified in the climate plan that are worth considering. A clean fuel standard to accelerate electrification and promote rapid growth in low carbon renewable fuels. That is something that's included in the climate plan. It's also included in the state's mobility plan and as a recommendation from the Council on Future Mobility and Electrification. And we think it could be the type of comprehensive statewide approach where basically it helps ratchet down the carbon intensity of fuels on the road, and I think would really help drive toward vehicle electrification. It's also a somewhat complicated policy item, so I don't really want to get into the nuts and bolts. But if pressed, we could probably talk about it, but probably better for an offline conversation. provide purchase incentives for electric vehicles like what's been proposed in the governor's exec rec budget. And then there are even more recommendations in the Michigan Mobility Plan and Office of Future Mobility and Electrification that have really granular detail on some of these things that I think is worth taking a look at and considering. So I'm doing okay on time, but not as good as I would have liked to have done. I appreciate the nod, Chair Scott. So a few things, that's kind of what's in the climate plan that I think is really worth as a first step in terms of considering and thinking about, and I think is valuable to share with you all. I also want to share a few things that we're doing at the state and that show that there's leadership and activity happening across the board. The governor's signed agreements to power state-owned facilities with 100% renewable energy by 2025, committed to carbon neutrality in state buildings by 2040, pledged to reduce energy usage in state-owned facilities by 40% by 2040, developed a plan to responsibly site solar across state-owned properties, committed to begin electrifying the state's fleet, as you saw in the exec rec as well. And so what the leading by example piece is, you know, the climate plan, some folks will say it's not ambitious enough. I think a lot of folks will say it's a pretty aggressive set of targets. And the leading by example is to show that, like, we think we can do that, and we can do it in some cases faster than what we're calling for in the climate plan through operations of the state itself. So I'm not going to get into all of this, but I think it's really worth noting that the governor in her State of the State said, I haven't memorized the quote verbatim, but it is my favorite quote in a long time. It's like it says something to the effect of we released the My Healthy Climate Plan in 2022, and this is the year that the governor would like to make bold investments. So let's get it done. And that is the sentiment I want you all to walk away with, is we need to figure out how to get it done. And I think the budget recommendations really show that that was a true statement. If you look at kind of across the board, I'm not going to walk through every one of these, but you can see every section of the climate plan has some type of major investment that I think can really move the needle on a lot of the things we're talking about, and and I think it'll complement. One, this is a major priority in terms of being able to implement the climate plan, but I think a lot of this will also complement any possible legislation that might come to support the climate plan. And then last, I'll just say we put an annual report out every year, and we've only done it once because we've only had the plan for 1 year. But it is available online. It summarizes some of the state of play in Michigan, some of the major activities, not just taken by state government, but by local governments, tribal governments, private sector, business development, major announcements of facilities being open to produce electric vehicles. You can kind of look there to see kind of an additional set of stats. And it also summarizes some of the major activities of the Office of Climate and Energy, but also the state of Michigan across departments to help meet the My Healthy Climate Plan. And I expect that annual report to only get longer every year because we continue to put things out there. A couple of things I'll note. One thing that I'll highlight in the budget that I'm really excited about is that we're hoping to launch the My Healthy Climate Corps to take a Climate Corps program and as a pilot support communities in helping us implement the climate plan. And then the other thing I'll highlight is on April 11th and 12th, we have the My Healthy Climate Conference in Detroit. We're very, very excited about it. We see it as an inflection point for our work where we can kind of move from going out and talking about the plan and sharing information about the plan to really moving to implementation of the plan, and are very excited about that. We're expecting the event to sell out any day now, and really thrilled to kind of get to work on it. So that is everything that I have. I'm happy to take some questions. Sorry I went a little bit longer than I had promised, but yeah, happy to open it up.
Thank you very much for that informative presentation. Are there any questions? Representative Altman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Corey, and I believe your name was Travis. Thank you for being here and giving your presentation. pretty aggressive targets there. I'm wondering, do you think the shift towards most of our energy portfolio going to renewables, do you think that will result in higher prices for Michigan residents?
Renewable energy at the moment is the most cost-effective solution for electricity generation. I think in general you've seen, and you could talk to the commission about this in terms of trends over time, but you've seen general increases in rates over time. But at the moment, if you were to build a new renewable energy facility, solar or wind, it is one of the absolute cheapest options for electricity generation. So
Is it though? I mean, let's take a look at sunnier California, which by this report generated almost a quarter of its energy from solar. And now residents in that state are paying, looks like 55% more for energy than the national average, more than double what Oregon and Washington were charged. Or let's take a look at Germany over in Europe. I mean, they were way ahead of us in terms of renewable energy. I think at one point their rates were about 300% more than the national average here in the United States, and now they're backtracking. Now they're buying fossil fuels from our adversaries such as Russia. I mean, how is that working out for them? So I've got some serious concerns with the pricing of renewables. What say you?
Well, the information I've read would indicate that we actually are at a point where, particularly with the federal incentives, that renewables are cost effective and competitive, and actually will help address some cost issues. That said, I'd be happy to kind of dig into it and see if we can find some additional information.
Yeah, please do. I mean, because are we going to subsidize this forever? I mean, what's the end game here? And I also have some concerns with reliability. I mean, there's many energy experts that are stating that Michigan could see rolling brownouts and blackouts in the future because of power shortages caused by the state turning away from fossil fuels and running dramatically towards renewables. And MISO is continuing to sound the alarm on this. So the warning signs are there. My question is, are you guys taking this all into consideration? And I think it's a worthy goal. I mean, I want to get towards carbon neutrality, but are we doing it responsibly? And should we shoot our economy in the foot to reach that goal?
Well, on the reliability piece, I'll say that is a major factor in what we tried to incorporate in the climate plan. I think that there are a lot of opportunities where distributed energy resources, renewable storage, et cetera, can actually help with grid reliability. And we did put in that energy storage target with that exact intention to try and think about resource adequacy considerations. And we have actually, at Eagle, we have an energy storage roadmap that's about 150 pages long that is looking at exactly how much storage we need to make sure that we
Is that
address
technology here yet? Is it being utilized anywhere throughout the country?
Yeah, I mean, well, energy storage is a broad term, and there are many technologies.
Yeah, sure. And I think
developed.
mostly of battery storage. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the common
Yeah,
theme
but
in
like we
terms of
have
that.
the Ludington pumped hydro storage facility, for example, like
Yeah.
that, and that's a major energy storage asset.
Oh yeah, that's
that we have in the
fantastic.
state, right?
I would love to replicate that, maybe on a smaller scale even, because I mean that's phenomenal, that facility up there. But I keep hearing, oh, battery storage, it's going to be here. It's this emerging technology. We're going to get it on a large scale, and I just haven't seen it yet. So I'm just concerned with putting all our eggs in the renewable basket. I think diversification is pretty good for all areas of life, not exclusive to energy policy. And I'm just concerned with the direction we're heading.
I appreciate that, and I'm happy to follow up with any more of this. I think we touched on a lot of items that could use maybe some additional research or be able to pull something.
I look forward to those conversations. Again, thank you for being here.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
thank you.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair.
All right, Representative Green.
Yes, thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it. I have a question on your PowerPoint. How does one decarbonize a home? What does that mean?
Great question. I think it's the subject of many conversations. So when we're talking about the built environment and homes, there are two major sources. It's electricity or how you're heating your home, whether that's propane, natural gas, home heating fuel, like what my folks used to use, and now they've switched to propane up north. And so in terms of decarbonizing, there's energy waste reduction. I think we've been thinking a lot about how do you actually upgrade homes to make sure that they're they are safe and healthy to live in. And so that starts with just major, like basic home upgrades, roofs, windows, doors, things of that nature, making sure that indoor air quality is taken care of. And then kind of the next step is making sure that it's deeply energy efficient. So insulation, sealing up any type of leaks in the home, efficient appliances, things of that nature. And then kind of the next and deeper decarbonization step is considering things where it's economically beneficial, things like building electrification, heat pumps, electric heat pumps, things of that nature. And I think eventually we're hoping that we'll see distributed energy resources, energy storage as a part of that mix. But I think there's a lot of conversation. That's why you see that one being kind of 17% emissions reduction is kind of one of the lower numbers, but it's actually one of the more ambitious ones when you look at how successful we've been with energy waste reduction, yet our emissions in the built environment have been static for the last for about a decade. They've been about the same. So in terms of what that looks like, I think it's a whole suite of things, and happy to pull some more information about some of the issues there. There are a number of studies on kind of all of the different technologies and strategies that could go into that.
Yeah, I would like more info. I'm just deeply concerned about the decarbonization and how it impact our lower income areas and who are barely, making it to feed their families, but then decarbonizing their home is becoming a priority. And I guess that's concerning to me because you talk about equity, but that I don't see as very equitable there.
Yeah, if I can just one follow on to that. I mean, we see the very first step in decarbonizing a home as making sure that folks are reducing their energy bills and that they're in a home that is actually energy efficient. It's not, that includes, right now in many parts of the state, our weatherization assistance program is meant to support folks in making their homes more efficient. But we have, I think, a 25% deferral rate statewide, 75% deferral rate in Detroit, where folks can't qualify because they don't have some of the basic pieces taken care of, like indoor air quality or a roof that has a leak in it. Those things don't qualify under some of the assistance programs. And so those folks are sitting with homes that are inefficient. And so I think, to your point, like the first step in this to make sure it's equitable is actually investing deeply in home repairs. And then we go to the decarbonization step. And I think just the home repairs piece, when you think about things that are inefficient, having a hole in your roof is deeply inefficient. And so I think that really aligns with some of our baseline objectives. And then when we get down to that more deep technology upgrades, that's where we'll have to have even more conversations about some of the equity pieces. But I think a big focus, and you can see it even in the governor's exec rec in terms of home energy rebates and home repair dollars, we're trying to figure out how do we sync up and start with home repairs and see home repairs as a part of the climate solution in the built environment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Burns.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation this morning. Very interesting and informative. So my question has to do with something that happened in Minnesota recently, where they passed and signed into law 100% clean energy legislation, and they empowered their Public Utilities Commission to really prioritize some of the things that you've talked about today, including equity and affordability. Do you think that type of authority would support the governor in implementing the My Healthy Climate Plan?
In terms of expanded authority at the commission, I think it's one of the things that we put in the slide deck as something to consider. We pointed to the improving the IRP process to help make sure that we're meeting our decarbonization targets. I think that's a part of that. I think that considering ways to incorporate affordability into cost of service is a good idea as well. Again, I'm not going to opine directly on language for the commission. I think it's the type of thing that would be really great to speak with them in detail about. But I do think that there are some things to consider there that could help meet our climate objectives.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Chair recognizes Representative Preston.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your review today. My question is centered really around reliability, and as I look at us going forward, on Christmas Eve, the Midwest power grid came really close to rolling blackouts. We had a MaxGen event. We've got declining margins. Wind underperformed during that event. Do you consider that a shot over the bow and really a warning as to possibly moving forward in a reckless fashion, shutting down our coal at a greater accelerated rate, making sure that our citizens stay safe and secure? We just witnessed 700,000 outages during this icing event. Weather anomalies and aggressive weather events are going to strain the system going forward. How do we make sure that our citizens stay safe?
Yeah, well, I think you brought up a great point, which is that we are seeing an increased amount of these types of storms and these types of impacts, and I'm going to openly call them climate-related events that are making it harder to operate and maintain reliability. So I think in one sense, I think it's actually it's incumbent upon us to actually take climate action to help reduce and minimize those types of events moving forward. That said, we know that they're going to continue to happen. So I think that we have thought quite a bit about this in the climate plan, and the Public Service Commission, we've got a top-notch set of commissioners and an incredible team over there that are helping think this through. Our investor-owned utilities are obviously working on it. And I actually think that there are a number of solutions that are around decarbonization and reaching carbon neutrality goals that actually help toward reliability. Like I said, distributed energy resources out on the electric grid, investing in our electric grid so that we can make sure that we're accommodating increased renewables in a distributed manner, adding energy storage, demand response systems, things of that nature. And on the coal-fired power transition, I think if you look at the planned investments for the investor-owned utilities, they're largely transitioning away from coal-fired power generation, and that's a trend nationwide. I think what we called for is a modest acceleration to be able to meet our actual decarbonization targets, because if we can't meet that, the coal-fired power generation is a big piece of our ability to meet that 2030 target. And if we don't get on this pathway, we're just going to continue to see ever more difficult situations to maintain reliability due to weather-related events.
No, and I don't refute that. It's just the speed at which we're doing it. You know, a lot of the IOUs and co-ops, you know, they're putting their resources more into taking them away from the distribution grid, which is what we just saw. Trees, squirrels, those are the things that take down the distribution grid. When we ignore improvements in construction work plan on our distribution side, trying to make up for the accelerated decarbonization of our electrical system, and then you add to that an accelerated, 2 million EVs on the road. With the electrification of Michigan, I don't know where that capacity comes from, because if you shift it over to natural gas's first mandate is to the residential sector. So if we move this base load over to natural gas from coal, and we have a max gen event, and those generation facilities shut down, everybody's gas stove is working, but their blower for their furnace isn't. So I'm worried about the pace at which we're moving forward, and the safety to all the customers and members in this district of Region 7, because we're a net energy importer, not exporter. If you could comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's in the climate plan, I'm sorry I wasn't able to get into like every little thing, but we did point to making sure that we're deeply thinking about this in distribution system planning and considering how that process develops and evolves over time, along with the integrated resource plan process. And so I think all of these things are factors that have to be weighed in those decision-making bodies at the commission. I think that, and I will agree with you, like the pace we're talking about is fast. Like we need to go that fast to address the climate challenges. So I think it's one of those things that we need to figure out how to do it right.
Chair recognizes Representative Andrews.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again for the presentation. I think the plan you've laid out here is what I would say sufficiently ambitious. These are targets that we can hit and should hit, and I appreciate that the plan is pushing us in that direction. I have kind of two tied-in questions here. So my first question is, you mentioned briefly some of the things in the IRA that have come through the federal government that obviously came after a lot of this plan was set in place. Are there good mechanisms built into this plan to anticipate those kinds of federal dollars that could become available in the future, including what we have now in the IRA, so that we're positioning ourselves to put these funds to use to meet and maybe exceed some of the goals that we have in this plan?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the items that I mentioned, and I think we're going to continue to actually refine this, the announcement that's happening right now around the climate pollution reduction grants, the first stage of that is funding for refining our climate plan and identifying very specific areas where we can use federal funding and then compete for it. So the way that program's set up is it's $250 million in planning to states across the country with a potential of up to $3 million for any individual state. There's some of that goes to tribes and local governments as well. And then the next phase is $4.6 billion of competitive grants to implement said plans. And the intention of that is actually not to only have the identified projects and opportunities be eligible for those $4.6 billion, but also for a whole bunch of other federal and state level funding as well. So I think we're doing that. We spend a lot of time at our office trying to figure out how to make sure we're taking advantage of and pursuing as much federal dollars as possible and bring as much climate-related funding home to Michigan as possible.
Go ahead. I just want to add one thing to that because it's particularly topical to the legislature right now. So one of the things in the supplemental that was moved yesterday over in the Senate is a little over $200 million for home energy rebates. That's federal money that is dedicated to Michigan, but we need to work with you all, obviously, to get that appropriation authority. So it's going to be a partnership as well. We're staying right on top of it, Corey and his team and other folks around the state, but we'll make sure we keep getting those in front of you.
Absolutely. And so as a sort of second part to that question, some of this was in the IRA Act as well. I think, all of us are sensitive to grid stability issues in general, especially with, recent events. But the thing that I'm not hearing from the others is that one of the more reliable sources of energy that we could invest in is not 18th and 19th century fuels like coal and gas, but nuclear. I have 2 plants in my district, 3 reactors, one's being decommissioned. But, as a non-carbon producing energy source and the IRA funding a lot of, innovation in that space, do you guys see any route for integrating some of that technology as a base load capacity to the grid to kind of complement what we're doing here with wind and solar and renewable sources?
Yeah, well, I think about 20% of our electricity generation today is from nuclear, and the climate plan is somewhat dependent on that continue to operate through 2030. So if you add that up with the renewables target, it gets closer to 80% decarbonized or low or zero carbon electricity generation. In terms of how to integrate or whether we can integrate newer technologies around nuclear, modular reactors, things of that nature, I do think that there was a study asked for by the legislature that I think is at the commission. I don't know if it's been completed yet. If it has, we could follow up with that. But I think that's actually meant to investigate this exact question: is it affordable? At what point will it be? What technologies are able to be deployed at what scale? And so I think it's something that's being considered, but I don't think that I have the information adequate to say definitively how we would integrate it right now.
Sure. Yeah, I just appreciate you guys continuing to look into that as an option. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Chair recognizes Representative Bagole.
Good morning. Thank you. The 60%, excuse me, renewable resources by 2030. It seems like an aggressive plan, and it kind of goes back to Representative Andrews' question. How come you're not putting more into the nuclear resources versus some of the renewable, like I'm assuming solar and things like that?
Yeah, major, very large-scale nuclear facilities are actually very, very expensive to build at this stage, and largely the domestic supply chain on that actually and workforce to develop those has sort of transitioned because we haven't built very many in the United States for quite a while. And so I think if there are future applications for nuclear, it's probably around small modular reactors and some of those emerging technologies. And that's actually exactly what I think the study asked for by the legislature is meant to get at, is what are some of those options and how could you consider it? So I think we're hopeful to learn more from that as it evolves.
Is there a backup plan if the if the grid doesn't have enough power from all the renewable 60%?
Well, I think we're trying to make sure that we plan for that as we go. I mean, this is working toward 2030. We want to make sure that this is factored into integrated resource planning, distribution system planning. Those are in the buckets of the commission, and they're well versed in that process to make sure that we're thinking about that. And to be clear, this is a framework that we're proposing of what we think is one minimum scenario to get to the emissions reductions we need to get to. But you can imagine, if you start thinking about different ways to decarbonize, there may be other options. I think that the energy storage piece is a big piece of what we're thinking about, and having a diversity of technology. So not just batteries, but thinking about air compressed storage, thinking about pumped hydro storage, thinking about emerging technologies in that space, and making sure, and I think that's one thing worth noting is energy storage. We talked about diversity of portfolio. Energy storage is a diverse set of technologies that we actually want to make sure that whenever we're thinking about how to integrate more energy storage to basically address this issue of resource adequacy and reliability, that we're open to many different kinds of energy storage when considering it. And I think that's just an important piece because the technology is evolving. New solutions are coming kind of every day right now.
Okay, thank you. But doesn't it make more sense to spread that out more rather than put everything 60%?
I think my understanding and the research we did on this is that 60% is very achievable and can deliver a reliable grid that can be resilient to some of the challenges that we've talked about today. But I think that there's obviously lots and lots of factors in making sure that in what it's going to look like to get to 2030 and reduce the emissions sufficient to reach our climate goals. And I'd be happy to follow up a little bit more on some of these items as well offline.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. And we're going to recognize Representative Hill, kind of make it a little brief because we do have another presenter. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, folks. I'm going to speak for a second about my experience as a Marquette City Commissioner. Speaking of importing energy, every time when we had coal-fired power plants on the shores of Lake Superior and Marquette, every time a coal boat came into Marquette, it cost our community $1 million. If we had energy that was here, that was a panel that we put up, once you paid for the cost of that panel to go up, it wouldn't cost us but hundreds of dollars to maintain that system going forward. So in terms of this transition, we as a community have already torn down our coal plant because it was so expensive. $1 million going right out of the community to keep us warm in the Upper Peninsula. So we're excited about the opportunities to have homegrown energy. And I also want to call out that innovation, the innovation around batteries, the innovation around our energy systems are that's what Michigan does. We make the things that help our economy grow. And so we are excited, and I understand that people have questions. There's a lot to learn about energy. And so as we are having a chance to just begin to understand that with this group of people here, and knowing that the other thing about energy is that it is evolving so quickly. And so what we have a hearing a year from now, and there will be new technologies coming along that will actually probably be cheaper and also increase our reliability. And so I'm excited that we're here and folks are asking good questions about how is this going to work, because it is going to look really different. And in particular, understanding that we're going to need to not just generate it, burn stuff. We don't need to burn stuff so much anymore, but what we are going to have to do is manage the information and manage the electricity. So to that point, I think, could you say a little bit more about IRPs? Because I think people might not, in terms of this reliability question, our utilities are required to make 5-year plans, and they have been required to do so since 2016. Could you, I know this is a Public Service Commission bailiwick, but I think it's really relevant in this case of helping people understand that the utilities themselves are saying this is what it takes to be reliable, and that's to use renewables that are less expensive.
Yeah, I will direct like detailed questions on IRPs and distribution system planning to the commission. I know you had Chair Scripps here a few weeks ago, and they are much well versed and expert on those issues. But I think your broader point is absolutely correct, which is that these aren't just things that we're calling for in the climate plan. The investor-owned utilities in Michigan, but also across the country, folks are transitioning to renewable energy, higher penetrations of renewable energy as a prudent business decision. And we're saying we need to think about how to make sure that as we make this transition, we're doing it sufficient to meet the climate objectives. But I think if you look at the integrated resource plans that are before the commission and that have been developed by the investor-owned utilities, you'll see major shifts toward renewable energy. And that's independent of our climate plan in a lot of cases. So I think the point's well taken, and for any like really detailed information, those are, they're like sometimes like 800 pages long. Like they're very long things that have a lot of intricate work and detail into it. So I would be loath to get into too much more because I think it would probably be wrong. So
I do have one follow-up to that as well. And then and also, please keep in mind that those integrated resource plans are reviewed by the Michigan Public Service Commission and have to meet standards that the Public Service Commission has. And as Rep. Andrews mentioned, we may want to increase those standards. I think that was Andrews. Somebody talked about internal, helping support the Michigan Public Service Commission. Make sure that the standards that it had that were adequate for the 20th century are updated for the 21st century and are meeting the needs that we have today, which must include climate considerations so that we can be better prepared and resilient against these larger storms that we're having. On the question of battery storage, could you lay out a little bit more? I know we've been talking about it some, but it is the most fast-changing place. And I just want to remind folks, one person once said to me, when's the last time you had to plug in a hand drill, right? We are using batteries now for things that were unimaginable just a few years ago. Things including, of course, cars, which are now able to move with batteries and go faster than gas-powered cars, in fact. So the role of batteries in supporting our needs going forward, could you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it's fundamental, both at a large-scale, utility-scale measure, thinking about large-scale storage, as well as thinking about at individual homes and increasing resilience within neighborhoods at a building-by-building level. And I think, I've talked kind of ad nauseum about the need to think about a diversity of technologies in that space. I think one of the things I didn't talk about as much is I actually think when you think about our position as the state of Michigan and our economic competitiveness, you've heard battery facilities being built. And that actually, I think it's one of the more incredible opportunities we have as a state, is that we actually have the opportunity to not just build batteries and energy storage devices for electric vehicles, but also for the electric grid. And those are two gigantic global markets, and we have the opportunity to be a leader in both. And I think that's a really incredible opportunity. So that's getting away a little bit from the investment on the grid, but I think it's an important thing to think about in terms of our economic development. And I think that we have the opportunity to really, like you said, innovate here, bring technologies to bear here, deploy them here, and have even better economic position vis-a-vis other states and other countries. So.
Okay. Thank you for that detailed and informative presentation. You're very popular here this morning. We'll have to have you back. Thank you, Corey Connolly. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. All right. It's my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Eric Frederick from the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity and for the Michigan High-Speed Internet Office.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members for having me here today. Before I begin, I want to be respectful of the committee's time, so I will try to be as quickly as I can with a very big and important topic, though.
I appreciate it.
So I'm here today to talk to you about the Michigan High-Speed Internet Office, introduce you to our work, and the very large opportunity we have before us to make sure that we are connecting every home, business, institution, and community in the state of Michigan. So I'm going to start at a very high level and introduce you to our office, the who, what, why, where, and how of how we're going to tackle this very critical topic that was really brought to the forefront of everyone's mind during the COVID-19 pandemic. So our office is located within the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. We are the state's single point of contact for all things broadband and connectivity, digital equity, digital inclusion. It looks like the formatting on my slides didn't quite translate over, so we'll have to get you a copy of that going forward here. But we are an office of 8. We finished staffing up in early January, and we've really put together a team to address this topic, not only on the infrastructure side, because that's usually where folks' minds go when we talk about broadband connectivity, but also on the digital equity and inclusion side, because that's really what we're here to talk about and the whole goal of our office. So our mission, we are a mission-driven office, is to create a more digitally equitable Michigan where everyone can leverage technology to improve their quality of life. Period. Now, digital equity is a very big topic. It involves a number of different factors and overcoming a number of different barriers to the digital divide. When we think about achieving digital equity and overcoming that digital divide, we're really thinking about 5 different primary areas. We're thinking about affordable, robust broadband service, so the actual infrastructure, the wires in the ground, the signals in the air that are connecting our homes, businesses, and communities. We're also thinking about internet-enabled devices, making sure everyone has a device, whether that be a phone, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop, to connect to that network to actually be able to use it. We're then also talking about access to digital literacy or digital skills training to make sure that our workforce, our seniors, our students all have the skills able to leverage that technology to do whatever it is they want to do, whether it's accessing telehealth or extending their educational opportunities, accessing government services, simply communicating with family members. Those skills are necessary across all of those different applications. The 4th tenet is quality technical support. So when we put the device in the hands of someone or we get them new skills, we want to make sure that those skills can continue, that those devices and connections can work the way they're supposed to. So providing technical support is another tenet of digital inclusion, which is that work then that we do to get over that divide to the digital equity. And then finally, the 5th tenet of digital inclusion is the applications and online content that enable us to improve our quality of life, self-sufficiency, participation, and collaboration in society. Again, things like telehealth, distance learning, access to services, and so on. So by examining and doing our work through the lens of digital inclusion, that lets us make sure that we're addressing all the barriers of the digital divide. In Michigan, about 1/3 of our households are struggling with some form of the digital divide, whether the infrastructure is simply not available to them, or if the infrastructure is available, it's out of reach financially, it's not affordable to them, or maybe they have been connected, but they don't have a device that meets their needs to do what they want to do, or they might not have the skills. So you can see how all of these different barriers layer on top of each other, and again, about 1/3 of our households are facing some form of the digital divide or multiple forms of that digital divide. This slide I put together here, and the text on this slide is small on purpose. Because, like I said before, we are a mission-driven office looking at digital equity, and this slide reminds us of who we're doing this work for, and reminds us that our work is not about the technology, it's about people. Technology enables people, but we're doing this work for every student that had to sit outside a McDonald's or a library to connect to Wi-Fi to do their homework during the pandemic, We're doing this for every parent who wants to learn a new skill to further support their family, for every business that wants to find a new customer base in a virtual online environment, and the list goes on. This is a list that is kept in my office, and our staff add to it regularly. This only represents about a third of what's on that list in my office. So we're continually finding the ways to remind ourselves that our work is not about the technology, it's about people, and that technology enables people to do the things that they need to do. So the work that we're going to do in Michigan to connect every home, business, institution, and community is really done everywhere. When we first think about infrastructure, we think about rural communities where the infrastructure simply isn't there to the capacity and speeds that are required. But that's not just true of rural. In a lot of our urban communities, we have gaps in that infrastructure as well. So we need to make sure that we're identifying those gaps, those locations that need to be connected, both in rural and in urban. And we know that once those connections are there, every part of the state is going to struggle with those other barriers of the digital divide that I talked about: affordability, devices, digital skills. And so those are things to address at a universal scale across our state. I also put vast open spaces on here. We have a lot of vast open spaces in Michigan. That's one of the reasons we love this state so much. But we need to make sure that those places are connected with cellular service, mobile service, not only for the convenience of residents and others, but also for emergency services as well, should something happen in those places of the state. So the work that we're going to be doing that I'm going to talk about here in a second will literally be done in every corner of our state. So how are we going to achieve our mission? We have two primary goals in our office. The first is to achieve the universal availability of high-speed internet. You're going to hear me use the terms high-speed internet and broadband. I use them interchangeably. But we are going to ensure that universal availability, again, to every home, every business, every institution, and every community in our state. And then the second goal is ensuring that 95% of households adopt a permanent connection at home. And that means addressing those other barriers. So we kind of have the infrastructure supply side equation that we're working to solve with ensuring universal availability, as well as that demand side and overcoming all those other barriers that we know households face once that connection is there. And the way that we're going to approach our work is through four primary principles: creativity, efficiency, transparency, and collaboration. And I'm going to start with collaboration because we can't do this alone. Very similar to the last presentation you saw today, climate and energy impact every sector of our economy, and so does connectivity. So we need input from literally every corner of our state to make sure that we are developing plans and implementing our programs that meet the needs of every Michigander. And we can't do that without collaboration. And through that collaboration, we hope to find creative ways to solve this challenge. The challenge hasn't been solved yet, or we wouldn't be sitting here today talking about it. So we need to get creative in finding new models of ways that connectivity can be addressed, and again, all of the other challenges that we're going to address through digital inclusion. In a minute, you're going to see the significant resources that we have coming to the state of Michigan to solve this challenge, and they are significant, but we need to be efficient with how those resources are implemented so that we can make sure we truly achieve our goals. And to be efficient, we also need to be transparent. The federal government has given grant programs and subsidies to tackle this problem for a number of years. And we want to make sure that we're not making the same mistake of not having follow-up or validation that those grants that were given out were not necessarily built the way they were supposed to. And so we are planning very robust transparency measures to make sure any grant that comes out of our office is built the way it's supposed to, is connecting the locations it's supposed to. And we can't do that without, again, being creative, efficient, and collaborative as well. There are historic investments coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law to address this challenge. The three pieces of this pie chart here that are not bolded represent just over $450 million that have been invested in this space by the federal government and the state of Michigan over the last several years, really since 2019, so just before pre-COVID. Again, $450 million or so has been invested in this space. But I want to put that in comparison to what we see is coming. So the first program that I'm going to talk about here in a second is the Realizing Opportunity with Broadband Infrastructure Networks, or the ROBIN program. This is a $250 million very traditional broadband infrastructure grant program that the legislature created last April using capital projects funds from the United States Department of the Treasury. This program is open right now for applications. I expect to receive requests for funding that are at least 3 times the amount of money we have. There is big interest in this space, and rightfully so. There's lots of resources coming, and we want to solve this problem. So this application window closes March 14th. And again, it's open right now. The State Digital Equity Planning and Capacity Grants is a much smaller program, but it's the first time we've seen the federal government really invest in digital inclusion and digital equity. Again, those much harder barriers of the digital divide to solve, I believe. So the state of Michigan it has received a $1.33 million planning grant to create a statewide digital equity plan. And then there will be a follow-on formula allocation-based grant for capacity building or implementing that plan. But the biggest piece of this pie is called the BEAD program, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. And while we don't yet know the state's full allocation in this program, and we won't know until June 30th of this year at the latest, I estimate this will be anywhere from $1.5 to $1.8 billion for Michigan of a $42.5 billion pool that was part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. That is a significant investment in this space. I've been working in this space for a very long time, and I believe that the resources that are coming, combined with all of these different funds and our guiding principles of creativity and efficiency, are truly enough to solve our connectivity challenges. Maybe not all of our digital inclusion challenges, because those are much more systemic and long-term challenges to solve. But when it comes to the universal availability, I believe these resources are significant enough to get it done. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over a little bit of some of the details of these programs because I want to get to the part of planning. So we're a little bit behind our sister organization at Eagle with the plan that they've created, and we are in planning mode now. We have to create a plan for the BEAD program. We have to create a plan for digital equity as per our federal requirements for these funds. But in the interest of efficiency, we're combining those planning efforts together. So I don't want to silo infrastructure from digital equity and inclusion. They are one and the same, and we need to address them simultaneously. And so we are embarking on a pretty robust and comprehensive statewide planning effort to identify our state's challenges and how these funds should be invested to solve our challenges. And we're doing that in two main ways. We are holding 40 community listening sessions across the state of Michigan. Those started in January and will run about 2 a week until mid-May. We have held, I believe we're at number 13 or 14 now. We had one yesterday down in Charlotte and one in Lansing tomorrow, actually. And we are holding these meetings to listen to communities. I want to make it very clear that we aren't drafting a plan and taking it out and saying, what do you think? We are going to communities and engaging stakeholders to identify their needs, to listen to their aspirations, to listen to their ideas of how we solve this, to listen to the barriers that they face to getting connected. So we are listening first and planning second. And we want to make sure that that's really clear. The second prong of our engagement process to create this plan is what we're calling our partnership roundtable. And we've identified nearly 400 organizations in the state that have a stake in this space. Anyone from internet service providers, of course, to AARP, to the Association of United Ways, to community action agencies, to the Michigan Road Commission Association, and many, many others that can impact the deployment of broadband and really impact this space or have direct contact with folks that can benefit from getting better connected. And so we've created this partnership roundtable. We had our first meetings of this group last week with participation from nearly 250 different organizations. The partnership roundtable will continue monthly for the foreseeable future, and the roundtable is designed to help us answer some very big questions that we need to answer about how we establish a program that uses these funds that fits Michigan best. And so we're starting with this roundtable asking some planning questions, some very broad, what is your vision? What do you see as a connected Michigan? And then moving forward after that with, again, very detailed questions about how we set up essentially a sub-granting program for these funds that are coming to deploy those funds to connect every corner of our state. And like I said, these planning efforts are combined and will inform both of the required planning efforts that we have with the federal government. Like I said, we've held community meetings so far in a lot of different places. We're in the process of kind of moving northward through the lower peninsula and chasing that snow north to the upper peninsula. And there's more information on our website, michigan.gov/MIConnectedFuture. And again, we are holding community meetings and would invite you to participate in those as they are very informative and very helpful in learning more about what the community's needs are. And again, we have our partnership roundtable as well that will be continuing here into the near future. So the timeline for all of this is fairly convoluted. We have 3 separate federal programs, 1 from Treasury, 2 from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, whose timelines don't necessarily line up in the notice of funding or from the bipartisan infrastructure law. But again, we are here in February of 2023. We're in the middle of our planning. We're in the middle of working with the FCC to make sure that they've created a national broadband map that is accurate, that will be used to allocate funding to the state by June 30th, like I said. We're in the middle of our Robin program, taking applications for that. We hope to award those grants by the end of summer, hopefully before Labor Day is our timeline. It really will depend on the number of applications we receive. We will finalize our our 5-year action plan by August 22nd. We will finalize our digital equity plan by September 29th. And then we will work with the federal government to create what's called our initial proposal. And that is the nuts and bolts document. That is how the state will run our BEAD subgrant program, which again will work to invest and grant out that $1.5 to $1.8 billion to achieve universal availability and solve digital inclusion challenges. So there's a lot going on in this space right now. Our office is well equipped to address that. But I want to make sure that I'm leaving enough time here to answer any questions you might have, and I look forward to working with this group as we go forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Chair recognizes Representative Hill.
Thank you. Good to see you again. I attended one of the listening sessions up in Marquette just before sled dog race, and it was a really terrific event. We had like 30 people there, and I can state that, yes, they listened, and we had a very diverse group in that room. And thank you for that. Even the director of Leo was there. My question is if we could spend a little more time to dive in a little bit on affordability and how is affordability defined, and then how do we protect the rights of municipalities and schools to potentially offer their own. We do have, NMU has its own program, and we have municipalities. Lance, in my district, actually has downtown Wi-Fi, a small town of a couple thousand people, and offers downtown Wi-Fi for its communities.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for participating in that event in Marquette. It was a lot of fun to be up there. So I'm going to answer the second question first, to talk about the kind of the entities that can participate in these programs. So the Robin program that's operating right now is open for private sector internet service providers or communities that have created a public-private partnership with an internet service provider. The legislation that created that program was written that way. The BEAD program, however, that is coming, the bipartisan infrastructure law makes it very clear that a wide variety of entities must be able to participate in that process, from private sector internet service providers to partnerships to cooperatives to nonprofit organizations, a wide range of entities. And it's spelled out very clearly in that law that they must be able to participate. So that's where we really see that creativity piece coming in how those entities can get involved in this space, however that may be. And again, either it's on their own or with a partnership. That's what I'm looking forward to most, is how that creativity can manifest itself by making sure that we're allowing all entity types to participate. On the affordability piece, defining affordability is tricky in this space. There are a couple guardrails for not only the Robin program, but for the BEAD program as well, that address affordability. So in both of those instances, for both of those programs, anyone who is a grantee under those programs must participate in what's called the Affordable Connectivity Program. The ACP program is an FCC subsidy that provides a $30 per month discount on internet service for qualifying households. That is the largest subsidy we've seen in this space ever. But it really is only for low-income households, so anyone making 150% of the federal poverty level or less. The BEAD program allows states then to add on to that by creating what's called a middle-income affordability plan. We don't yet have some kind of guidelines for what that needs to look like from NTIA yet, but it's something that the state's going to have to define as we set up our BEAD program. So the low-income program through the ACP is a great opportunity there, but having the opportunity then to address middle-income affordability, I think, is going to be really key to making sure that the networks that are deployed remain affordable for everyone.
Okay, the chair recognizes Representative Wenzel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here today. I have a question on the when you'll be evaluating the grant applications. You said there was a lot more applications, obviously, than there is money. So, kind of that process, and also if there's competing grant applications in a similar area, if one of the applicants is part of the problem, so to speak, as far as that they historically maybe haven't made investments that they should have into the communities in the past. How are you going to kind of decipher that, I guess?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So, and thank you for that. So we have a fairly robust scoring criteria that all of our applications are going to be run through. The legislation was very clear about a lot of those scoring criteria when it was passed last year, including financial wherewithal, organizational capacity, and so we do look at past financial performance of an entity, and then any past, if there's community support, or maybe there's communities that might speak up and not support an application for a certain reason. All of that is taken into consideration. So we have community support criteria, financial wherewithal, sustainability of the network is very key. So we have a pretty broad-based team of folks who will be reviewing applications. Our office looks at a certain portion of those applications. We also have a steering committee that's made up of representatives from multiple state agencies that will be reviewing those applications as well, and an outside engineering and technical team to really look at the nuts and bolts of the actual engineering plans and designs and the financial models for those networks. So it's a lot of input that goes into each one of those applications, and then our steering committee works on consensus. And so we will then take all those scores and sort them by scoring, and then be able to come up with those applications. So there's lots of information that's provided not only by applicants themselves, but from community support or communities or otherwise that come to our group as part of those applications.
Are there any other questions? Okay. Recognizes Representative Preston. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation today. I was just curious, on your grant program, do you guys have any type of scoring criteria such as DEI involved in that scoring program, and when it comes to an applicant's ability to procure funds?
So DEI in my world is digital equity and inclusion.
Yep.
And so we do have some scoring criteria that does speak to affordability. And we also ask applicants to provide us information about how, or if they're going to provide any kind of digital skills training in that community that they're going to be doing once these networks are available, and some of the awareness building that they're going to be doing. So awareness is one of those digital inclusion barriers to making sure that folks know that these new networks exist and that there's resources to help them adopt those networks or subscribe to those networks once they're there. So there are a couple elements of our scoring criteria that speak to those particular issues, because they're critical to making sure that once the networks are deployed, they can be sustained, because the higher subscribership there are to those networks by overcoming those digital inclusion barriers, the more successful and sustainable those networks can be in the long run.
Because as a rep of the UP, there's certain boxes that we just simply cannot check when it comes to some of that criteria. We've run into that in the it's one of the educational grant programs, but I just wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to adversely affect, the UP, which is severely disadvantaged when it comes to digital integration, as we go forward.
Yeah, those are some of the criteria that I really haven't heard much feedback from potential applicants on. Those criteria are actually were brought to the Robin program from the previous Connecting Michigan Communities grant program. So those criteria have really been part of the state grant program since late 2018, when that CMIC program was originally created, and the foundation for Robin, that legislation was really grounded in that CMIC program. So a lot of the elements from that are now present here as well. And so we've had very favorable reactions to those scoring criteria from applicants in the past too.
And then my last question is, are you guys involved at all? Up by us, there's an aggressive installation of fiber throughout the community, and we're running into some issues regarding co-location on poles. There's lawsuits that are going on. Where do you guys fit into the mix as far as bringing order to chaos? Because it kind of seems like the Wild Wild West in a lot of ways, in certain sections, especially in my district, and I'm sure throughout.
No, that's a good question too. So the deployment that's going on in the UP now, I'm very familiar with. That was funded by the FCC through the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. So our office doesn't necessarily play a role between that applicant and the FCC. Obviously, we watch it very closely. It was a very exciting deployment for the UP, getting that fiber built out there. But you bring up some more global issues that will impact the deployment of these services, even once, not only for the Robin program, but for the BEAD program and into the future. So that's why our partnership roundtable includes folks like our investor-owned utilities that own poles, electric cooperatives that own poles, those that represent right-of-way operators, road commissions in particular, drain commissions. So there's a whole host of barriers to deployment that the NTIA and the federal government has told us to watch and come up and include in our plans ways to alleviate some of those barriers. And so as we move forward with our planning efforts, I want to try and find some solutions to some of these barriers that have been persistent in this space over for a while, but are going to get amplified as more funds then are invested into this space.
Yeah, just to follow up, that's probably my biggest worry is as this ramps up, I see that problem continuing to exacerbate, and just hoping that you guys have your eye on that.
Yes, we definitely do. Thank you.
Okay. No more questions. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for that presentation, Eric Frederick. We really, really appreciate it. I want to say that, all of the presentations today were emailed to members, and it's also going to be available on our Energy Common Tech website. Okay. All right. So we need a motion to excuse one absent member, which is Representative Eric Gana. Okay. And we have Green. Thank you, Representative Green. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. With there being no further business, we are going to be adjourned today. Thank you.